My sister, Carolyn, had always been the golden child. Everyone loved her, from her dazzling smile to her effortless charm. She had it all: a successful career, a beautiful home, and a husband who adored her. Meanwhile, I, the younger sibling, was often overlooked. I didn't mind it much. I was content with my modest life and found solace in my solitude. But everything changed the day Carolyn's marriage fell apart. It started innocently enough. Caroline had come to visit me one evening, tears streaming down her face. I remember feeling a pang of concern as she walked through my door, looking disheveled and broken. She sat on my couch, barely able to speak through her sobs. "David. He's leaving me," she choked out. I tried to comfort her, offering tissues and a listening ear. It was hard to see my sister, always so composed, crumble like that. As she continued to pour out her heart, a strange feeling gnawed at me. Something about her story didn't add up. Days turned into weeks, and Carolyn's visits became more frequent. She seemed to be spiraling, her once perfect life in shambles. Then came the night that would change everything. Caroline arrived at my place late, her eyes wild with a mix of fear and desperation. "It's your fault," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. I stared at her, taken aback. "David found out about us." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "What are you talking about? There's no us, Carolyn." But she wouldn't listen. She was convinced that her husband had left her because of some imaginary affair between us. It was absurd, but she believed it wholeheartedly. The next day, she told our parents. To my horror, they believed her too. They accused me of destroying her marriage, of being a home wrecker. I tried to defend myself, but their minds were made up. One by one, my family members turned their backs on me. I was ostracized, abandoned by the very people who were supposed to love and support me. I moved to a small, isolated cabin in the woods, seeking solace in the silence. But the silence was soon broken by whispers in the dark, eerie sounds that echoed through the trees at night. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, a byproduct of my loneliness and despair. But the noises grew louder, more persistent. Shadows seemed to move just beyond the edge of my vision, and I began to feel a constant sense of being watched. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard footsteps outside my window. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a soft tapping on the glass. I bolted upright, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I crept to the window and peeked through the curtains. There was no one there. Just the dark, empty forest staring back at me. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, maybe a branch brushing against the window. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The following days were a blur of paranoia and fear. I barely slept, jumping at every noise, every shadow. I started finding strange symbols carved into the trees around my cabin, symbols I didn't recognize. It felt like some kind of curse, an otherworldly punishment for a crime I didn't commit. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I heard a familiar voice calling my name. I stepped outside and saw Carolyn standing at the edge of the woods. She looked different, almost ethereal. "Carolyn?" I called out, my voice trembling. She didn't respond, just turned and walked into the forest. Against my better judgment, I followed her. The woods were dark and foreboding, the trees closing in around me. I stumbled through the underbrush, trying to keep up. "Carolyn, wait!" I shouted, but she kept moving deeper into the forest. Finally, I reached a clearing and stopped dead in my tracks. Carolyn stood in the center, her back to me. Slowly, she turned, and I saw her face. It was twisted in a grotesque mask of rage and sorrow. "You did this?" she whispered, her voice echoing through the clearing. "You took everything from me." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. "I didn't, Carolyn. I swear I didn't." She moved closer, her eyes burning with an unnatural light. "You will pay for what you've done." Before I could react, The ground beneath me gave way. I fell into darkness, the forest swallowing me whole. I woke up in my cabin, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. It had to be a dream, a nightmare. But when I looked at my hands, they were covered in dirt and scratches. The symbols around my cabin had multiplied, and the whispers in the dark grew louder, more insistent. My nights were plagued by visions of Carolyn, her ghostly form haunting my every step. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, and I felt myself slipping into madness. Desperate for answers, I reached out to an old friend who dabbled in the occult. She came to the cabin, her face serious as she examined the symbols and listened to my story. "You are cursed," she said simply. "A powerful, malevolent force is at work here. You must find a way to break the curse before it consumes you." She gave me a list of rituals and protective measures, but as the days wore on, nothing seemed to work. The presence in the woods grew stronger, more aggressive. I knew I had to confront it, to face whatever had taken hold of my sister and my life. On the final night, I prepared myself for a confrontation. Armed with talismans and spells, I ventured into the forest, following the path Caroline had taken. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, and the trees seemed to whisper threats and curses. In the clearing, Caroline waited for me. She looked even more otherworldly, her eyes glowing with an eerie light. "It's time to end this," she said, her voice echoing through the trees. I raised the talisman, chanting the words my friend had given me. The ground trembled, and Caroline screamed, a sound of pure agony. Shadows writhed around her, and I felt a force trying to pull me into the darkness. With all my strength, I pushed back, focusing on the light and the love I once felt for my sister. The shadows recoiled, and Caroline's form began to waver. "Please, let me go," she whispered, her voice filled with pain. Tears streamed down my face as I continued the chant, pouring every ounce of my will into breaking the curse. Finally, with a blinding flash of light, the presence shattered, and Caroline's form dissolved into the night. I collapsed to the ground, exhausted and broken. The forest was silent, the oppressive energy lifted. I made my way back to the cabin, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild my life. The whispers and shadows were gone, but the scars remained. My family never reached out, and I accepted that some wounds would never heal. But I found a new strength within myself, a resilience I never knew I had. The experience had changed me, leaving me with a deeper understanding of the darkness that can lurk within us all. And though I would always mourn the sister I lost, I knew I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. In the quiet of my cabin, I found peace, a fragile but enduring peace. The forest, once a place of fear, became a place of reflection and healing. I would walk the paths I had once feared, finding solace in the beauty and stillness of nature. And sometimes, in the soft rustle of leaves or the gentle whisper of the wind, I thought I could hear Caroline's voice, no longer filled with anger or sorrow, but with a quiet, forgiving peace.